All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, I guess you could say the unsung heroes of the business world.
Oh, interesting. I'm intrigued. Go on. Unsung heroes, huh?
Yeah, we're talking about contract specialists.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. Contract specialists. They're the ones who make sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes.
Exactly. And to get a real sense of what makes a great one, we dove into this article from Teslafy. It came out in February 2025.
February 2025. Okay.
Yeah, and the title itself is super insightful. It's called 60 Contract Specialist Interview Questions to Ask Job Applicants.
Wow, 60. That's a lot of questions. They must really want to grill these candidates.
Right. But what's really interesting is the article actually references some industry data from back in June 2023.
Oh, even earlier.
Yeah, and that data highlights just how much the demand for these professionals has skyrocketed. So we're going to try to figure out, like, what makes a contract specialist stand out from the crowd.
That's smart. Whether you're hiring, thinking about a career change, or just curious, it's good to know what it takes.
Exactly. So today, our mission is to go through these 60 interview questions and really pull out those nuggets of wisdom. Like, what are the essential skills and qualities that companies are looking for?
Sounds like a plan. And, speaking of that surge in demand, the article mentions that it's not just about filling empty spots, it's about finding the best of the best.
Oh, totally. Companies are realizing how crucial contract specialists are, especially now that businesses rely so much on partnerships and vendors.
Absolutely. A skilled contract specialist can make or break those relationships.
Okay, so to tackle this deep dive, we're going to follow the structure the article lays out. First up, the general interview questions, then we'll move on to the behavioral ones, and we'll wrap things up with the personality-focused questions.
Makes sense. Start with the basic and then dig deeper. So, those general interview questions, what kind of picture do they paint about what a contract specialist actually does on a daily basis?
Well, at its core, it's about managing the whole life cycle of contracts. And of course, being really good at negotiating the terms of those agreements.
Right. So, everything from drafting them to signing them and then seeing them through.
Exactly. And questions like, walk me through your experience in managing contracts and negotiating agreements, that might seem pretty standard, but it gets right to the heart of the role.
It's like a screening question. They want to know if you've even been in the game. But there's one example answer in the article that's really interesting. The candidate talks about how they managed to save their company 15% through a supplier negotiation.
Oh yeah, that one stood out to me too. What do you think that tells a potential employer?
Well, to me, it screams results. It shows they're not just going through the motions, they're actually making a real impact on the bottom line.
Totally. Then there are questions that focus on, legal stuff, complying with all the rules and regulations. Why do you think that's such a big deal in this role?
I mean, contracts are legally binding documents. You can't just wing it. A good contract specialist needs to be on top of all the legal aspects.
Yeah, they're the ones who keep the company safe from any legal headaches.
Speaking of headaches, how do you think they assess a candidate's ability to handle those really tough negotiations?
Well, the article has this question about a challenging scenario, like how would you handle this really tricky negotiation?
So they're not just testing knowledge, they're looking at problem-solving skills too.
Right, it's about how you think on your feet, how you stay calm under pressure, and how you can still get a good outcome for everyone.
Diplomacy, for sure. And then there are all those potential risks with contracts. The article talks about identifying and mitigating them. What were some of the key takeaways for you there?
Well, it was kind of eye-opening to see all the different things that can go wrong, like ambiguous wording, scope creep, those kinds of things.
Oh, yeah. And then they even talk about how things can get messed up if you're relying on other agreements that might fall through.
Exactly. And to deal with that, they emphasize having contingency plans, being super precise with the language you use, and knowing when to call in the legal team.
That makes sense. It's about being proactive.
Yeah. And there's a question specifically about that, like how would you go about identifying and resolving those contract-related problems?
I guess they want someone who's not just reactive, but someone who's constantly looking for potential issues and addressing them head on.
Exactly. Saves a lot of trouble down the road. And we can't forget about the sheer amount of work involved. Contract specialists are often juggling multiple projects at the same time.
So organization is key. The article even has a question about that, like how would you prioritize competing demands and manage everything?
Oh, for sure. The example answer they give talks about using a prioritization matrix to figure out what's most urgent and important.
That's a good system. It forces you to really think about what needs to be done first.
Right. And then there's the actual review process, like when you're going through a contract with a fine-tooth comb.
What should someone be looking for in that situation? What jumps out in a good response?
It's not just about skimming the surface. You have to understand what each party is obligated to do, spot any potential loopholes or inconsistencies, and make sure the terms are good for your company.
It's that meticulous attention to detail that really matters.
Yeah, you can't miss anything. And of course, there's working with other teams like legal, finance, procurement. The article asks about effective communication and collaboration.
Contracts touch so many different parts of the business, you have to be able to work well with everyone.
Exactly. The sample answer that stood out to me emphasized open communication, having regular meetings and addressing any concerns right away.
That makes the whole process much smoother for everyone. And speaking of smooth processes, technology is a big part of this role now, right? They have a question about experience with contract management software.
Oh yeah, that's essential these days. Those tools can automate so much, track deadlines, and even flag potential risks. It makes you so much more efficient.
Can you imagine trying to manage all of this manually? It would be a nightmare.
Absolutely. But even with all the tech, you still have to deal with people, including some really difficult ones.
Right, there's a question about how you'd negotiate with those demanding clients. That takes serious people skills.
Diplomacy is key, right? And being able to stand your ground while still maintaining a good relationship.
It's a delicate balance, and on top of all that, you have to keep up with all the changes in laws and regulations. The article asks about that too, staying current with best practices.
Oh yeah, this field is constantly evolving. You have to be a lifelong learner to stay ahead of the curve.
Falling behind could cost your company big time. They also talk about successful contract renegotiations and the strategies involved. What do you think makes a good negotiator in that context?
I think it's about understanding what leverage everyone has, pinpointing areas for improvement, and being able to articulate why the new terms would benefit everyone involved.
It's a win-win situation, ideally, but sometimes things go wrong and you have to deal with disputes. How do you think a good contract specialist approaches those situations?
Well, the key is to stay calm and focus on finding solutions. It's not about assigning blame. It's about understanding the contract and working towards a resolution that works for everyone.
Absolutely. And then there's the bigger picture. The article asks about making sure contracts align with the overall goals of the company.
That's strategic thinking, right? A good contract specialist understands how their work contributes to the company's success.
They're not just working in a silo, they see the whole picture. And ultimately, it all comes down to money, right? Managing cost, saving the company money. The article even gives an example of a 20% cost saving.
Yeah, they're not just managing paperwork, they're making a real financial impact. Okay, so we've covered the general questions. Those give us a good foundation. Now let's move on to the behavioral questions. What do you think these are trying to uncover that the general ones don't?
It's about seeing how you've actually handled things in the past. They're digging deeper, trying to predict your future behavior based on your past actions.
Right, like tell me about a time when kind of questions.
Exactly. So they revisit the difficult client situation, but this time it's about how you've actually dealt with a tough client.
The sample answer talks about keeping communication open, showing empathy, and coming up with alternative solutions.
That shows they can handle those tricky situations gracefully and effectively.
Yeah, it's not just about being tough, it's about understanding the client's perspective too.
And what about risk identification? There's an example where a candidate spotted a compliance issue and then went straight to the legal team. What do you think that shows?
To me, that shows they're not afraid to ask for help when they need it, and they're proactive about preventing bigger problems.
They're not just sitting back and waiting for things to blow up. Teamwork comes up again, too. There's a question about reaching consensus when everyone has different opinions. How do you navigate that?
Well, the answer talks about collaborative meetings, really listening to everyone's perspective and finding common ground.
It's about bringing people together and finding solutions that work for everyone. And sometimes you have to do all of that under a lot of pressure. There's a question about managing those tight deadlines.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. The example they give talks about creating a detailed plan, prioritizing tasks, and even delegating some things.
That's smart. It's about staying organized and focused when things get hectic.
Absolutely. And then there's the language of contracts itself. Sometimes it can be pretty complex, right? There's a question about how you'd make sure everything is clear and understandable.
Oh, that's so important. If the language is confusing, it can lead to all sorts of problems down the road.
Right. A good contract specialist can translate that legal jargon into plain English so everyone's on the same page.
They act as a bridge between the legal world and the rest of the company. And then they go back to cost savings, but this time they ask for specific strategies you've used.
Yeah, it's not just about saying, I'm good at saving money. You have to give concrete examples.
Show them the receipts, basically. And then, of course, disputes happen. How have you actually resolved disagreements in the past?
Well, the key is to stay calm and focused on finding solutions that work for everyone. It's about clear communication and negotiation skills.
It's about keeping those relationships intact as much as possible. Adaptability is another big one. They ask how you've handled changes in contract requirements.
Things are always changing in business. A good contract specialist can roll with the punches and adjust accordingly.
And once you've adapted, you have to communicate those changes to everyone involved. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, if people don't understand the changes, they're not going to be able to implement them properly.
Makes sense. It keeps everyone informed and prevents confusion. They also revisit the whole juggling multiple contracts thing. But this time, they want to know about the specific strategies you've used to stay organized.
Oh yeah, systems are key, whether it's project management software, detailed tracking sheets, or just really good time management techniques. You have to have a system that works for you.
And a good contract specialist is always looking for ways to improve things, right? They ask about identifying opportunities for optimization.
Absolutely. It's about not settling for the status quo, constantly evaluating processes, and finding ways to make things better.
They have a question about maintaining confidentiality, which is super important when you're dealing with sensitive information.
Trust is paramount in this role. You have to be able to handle confidential information with discretion.
And then there's that delicate balance of trying to satisfy everyone's needs in a negotiation. How do you find that sweet spot?
It's about being a good listener, understanding everyone's priorities, and getting creative to find solutions that work for everyone.
And they wrap up the behavioral section with a question about going above and beyond. What's the impact of exceeding expectations in this role?
Well, it builds trust, strengthens relationships, and enhances the company's reputation. It shows you're really committed to excellence.
It sets you apart from the crowd. So those behavioral questions really dig deep into how you've handled things in the past.
Now it's time for the personality questions. These are all about getting to know you as a person.
Those soft skills and character traits that are so important.
Yeah, like how you handle stress, how adaptable you are, how you interact with others.
For example, there's a question about handling pressure and tight deadlines.
The sample answer they give talks about prioritizing, breaking things down into smaller steps, and building in buffer time.
That shows you're organized and can handle stress without falling apart. And then they touch on adaptability again. How do you react when things change unexpectedly?
Well, the example they give talks about reassessing the situation, getting everyone on board with the changes, and readjusting priorities.
It's about being flexible and rolling with the punches. And then, of course, attention to detail. How do you approach those tasks where precision is absolutely essential?
They specifically mention using checklists and verification processes.
That's smart. It helps eliminate errors and ensures accuracy.
Yeah, you don't want to miss anything in a contract.
And contract specialists often have to work independently. So how do you stay motivated and organized when you're on your own?
The answer talks about setting clear goals, creating a plan, and rewarding yourself for accomplishments.
That's self-motivation in action. They also revisit juggling priorities. What are some strategies for handling multiple deadlines and conflicting demands?
They talk about using time management techniques, like ranking tasks by urgency and importance.
That's the Eisenhower matrix, right? It's a classic.
Yeah, and then there's communication again. This time it's about explaining complex legal concepts to people who aren't lawyers.
That's a valuable skill, being able to bridge that gap. How do you approach that?
Well, it's about using clear, concise language and avoiding jargon. You have to be able to break things down and make them understandable for everyone.
And then, of course, relationships are important. How do you approach building and maintaining those relationships with stakeholders?
The answer emphasizes active listening, showing empathy, and being honest in your communication.
Those are the foundations of any strong relationship. And what about when disagreements happen with your own colleagues? How do you handle those situations?
The key is to stay professional, focus on the issue, not the person, and find a solution that works for the team as a whole.
Teamwork makes the dream work, right? And sometimes you need to get creative to solve problems. They ask about thinking outside the box to find solutions.
That's where your experience and problem-solving skills really come into play. You have to be able to think strategically and come up with innovative solutions.
And they touch on staying current with industry trends. How does a proactive contract specialist stay informed?
Reading industry publications, attending conferences, networking with other professionals. It's about being curious and always learning.
And lastly, they talk about teamwork. What are the qualities of a good team player in this context?
Being communicative, supportive, willing to share knowledge, and focused on the team's success.
Collaboration is key. Okay, so we've covered the personality questions, which really give us a sense of what makes a good contract specialist tick.
Now, the article moves on to something interesting: the power of skill assessments.
Why do you think those are important? Aren't interviews enough?
Well, interviews can be a bit subjective. Skill assessments provide a more objective way to measure someone's abilities and knowledge.
They're like a test to see if you can actually walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly, and they highlight 3 key areas where assessments are particularly useful. First up, contract law and regulations.
Making sure they understand the legal stuff, right?
Yep. They mention a contract management test to assess that knowledge.
Then there's negotiation and communication. How do you test for that?
Well, they talk about using both a negotiation test and a communication test to see how a candidate actually performs in those situations.
So you're not just relying on their word that they're good negotiators.
Right. And lastly, there's proficiency with contract management software.
That's becoming more and more important as technology takes over.
Exactly. The article mentions Legalon specifically as an example of software used for contract review processes. And again, they mention a contract management test that could potentially assess this too.
So for employers, what's the big advantage of using these assessments?
It takes out some of the guesswork. They can make more informed hiring decisions and find the most qualified candidates.
Reduces the risk of a bad hire. And the article wraps up by talking about Teslify's offerings, which include all sorts of assessments.
Yeah, they go beyond just contract skills too. They have assessments for things like cognitive function and personality.
So it's a more holistic approach to evaluating candidates.
Exactly. It gives you a much better understanding of the whole person.
So to sum up, the role of a contract specialist is pretty complex.
It's not just about paperwork. It's about legal knowledge, negotiation skills, risk management, communication, and having the right personality.
And those 60 interview questions from the Testify article are designed to uncover all of that.
And for anyone listening, whether you're hiring, job hunting, or just curious, understanding these aspects gives you a real edge.
It's a window into a crucial part of the business world. But it makes you think, doesn't it? As business gets even more complex, what will the future hold for contract specialists?
What new skills will they need? What challenges will they face?
That's something to ponder, for sure.
Definitely.
Well, that was a fascinating deep dive.
It was, wasn't it? All right, until next time,
See ya.
on the deep dive.